Hi again. Now that we've learned the basic letters of the Greek alphabet and some basic sounds, how to pronounce those letters, and some combinations that are called diphthongs, and which ones are not diphthongs but pronounced two vowels that are pronounced each separately, we need to begin to start building sentences, but we'll have to start at the very basic level. Um, First, some things that we need to know about punctuation marks. There actually were no punctuation marks in the original Greek manuscripts that John wrote and the Apostle Paul wrote and Moses wrote in Hebrew and so on. I don't know why they invented those later, but in the ancient world, probably to save space, since paper or papyrus, parchment was a more expensive thing to use. These were rather hard to make, and so they used all the available space that they had. We don't have those original manuscripts, but we know 99.9% accuracy as to what the words originally were. They've been copied down through the centuries very carefully. But the original manuscripts had no punctuation marks. In fact, they had no spaces between words. And sometimes that can create even an interpretation problem. Do we divide the line here and make this word, or is it this word? And there can be differences, but usually we can tell. In order to make the text more readable and accessible, though, we've added the Greek text, all the Greek texts have added punctuation marks to help us. So let's look at them very briefly. We're, we're in the process of building sentences, and the first punctuation mark would be a period and a comma. These are the same as we use them in English. Just remember that there were no periods and no commas. And when Paul was writing, for example, Galatians. So maybe sometimes an interpreter might disagree with another interpreter as to where the end of a sentence comes, especially in Paul because he likes to write long sentences. Uh, there is, for lack of a better word, a semicolon. Um, well, it is a semicolon in Greek. It's just not called that in English. It's a period above the line. When you see a period above the line, think of it as a semicolon in English. Just put it to the Greek text. That's the way we write semicolons in the Greek text. And we have question marks. But we have to watch out. The proper English semicolon with a period above and a comma beneath together does not mean what it means in English. It doesn't divide the middle of a sentence, doesn't join two parts of a sentence. Rather, it is a question mark. It comes at the end of a sentence. And if you see it, you know you have a question. And you need to interpret it as a question. So here they are. Theos. Notice that it's not a diphthong, this word. It means God. But each vowel is pronounced separately. There is no diphthong for epsilon omicron. Theos. Accent is on os. Theos. Period. Theos. Then a comma. Theos. semicolon, and theos, question mark. Theos? I'm not sure that the Greeks raised their voice at the end of a question, but they might have. We have no cassette recordings or CDs. I'm showing my age, of course, of any of Paul's messages or any of the other speeches in the Bible for that matter, of course. We have apostrophes in the Greek text, and they're the same as in English. They indicate that a letter has fallen out for whatever reason. So, as in this preposition, apo, which means from or away. If for any reason, usually the next word starts with a vowel, the Omicron drops out, then we put an apostrophe to show that there is a letter missing. We have three different accents in Greek. One is called acute, and it looks like this. One is called grave, and it comes from the other direction. Hard for me to describe. I think you can see it on the screen. Circumflex, my Greek teacher back in my day called an Easter bonnet. Comes from a tradition in at least American society, perhaps British as well, that ladies like to get a new hat at Easter. Don't think they do that so much anymore, but perhaps a new dress. Anyway, he called this accent to make it easier to remember an Easter bonnet. We won't make any difference in the pronunciation of syllables or words that are accented. We'll just place the accent in our reading at that point, and we won't try to distinguish. We don't even know in the original text how the accents were spoken. So I'm not sure that we could really make a difference. But there are great teachers who seem to know. The other thing you need to remember here is that we actually won't learn accent rules. The only thing that is important is that you, number one, when you read, you accent your reading as the text is accented. Theos, not theos. Theos, for example. And the other important thing is that there are certain words, if the accent is missing, they are different in meaning. And we'll show you some of those later. So the accent mark can make a difference in meaning if it's absent or if it's there. And you just simply have to know your vocabulary for that. Now, I've taken some slides from another teacher, Dr. Bill Mounts, and inserted them here because I found his material very helpful. It's available, by the way, online. You can download it yourself. PowerPoint presentations. I've taken pages out or slides out and placed them here. A process of syllabification. Wow, what is syllabification? It's simply dividing a word into syllables, into smaller parts, the parts that we use to read and pronounce the word. Now, dividing a word into different pieces so it can be pronounced. And the best way really to learn them, as it says here, is to listen carefully when learning vocabulary, when the teacher reads it. Listen to the teacher. This should be natural for the English speaker. For those who may be listening to this video segment and you're from South Asia, sometimes maybe it's hard to understand me. I understand that. Ask me or ask my assistant, Mr. Masood, to help explain if you can't quite understand what's being said. Here's one rule. There is one vowel or diphthong per syllable. So this word reads ke, ko, amen. Each syllable is pronounced separately. Ke, ko. Accent notice. Ke, ko, amen. Ke, ko, amen. A single consonant by itself, not a cluster, goes with the following vowel. So we have here actually a hard breathing, if you notice, he, ora, ka, men. He, ora, ka, men. So the ro goes with the vowel that follows. So it's he, ora, ka, men, and not he, or, ak, ka, men. Two consecutive vowels that do not form a diphthong are divided. So you have to pronounce, this is simply understandable already, you have to pronounce here the and a, since epsilon and alpha together are not a diphthong. You have to pronounce this ethe asametha. Ethe asametha. Ethe asametha. Notice ethe a. Ethe a. You don't have a diphthong with epsilon alpha, so you have to pronounce the and the separately. Fourth rule in syllabification. I should divide that into syllables to pronounce it. A consonant cluster that cannot be pronounced together is divided. For example here, improsthen. Hard to divide between mu and p. Imp, impros. No, it's easier. Improsthen. Improsthen. Notice the accents on the first syllable, but each syllable is pronounced separately. Improsthen. Fourth rule in syllabification, a consonant cluster that can be pronounced together goes with the following vowel. For example, the sigma and the tau go with omicron. So we have Christos, the word for Christ. Christos. And not Christos. Christos. Another rule, double consonants are divided. So for example, here we have two rows together, par, roe, and each is pronounced separately, paresia. Notice that the accent is on the sia. And words that end in the last vowel, the second to the last vowel is an iota, generally have the accent on the iota. So like koinonia, not koinonia, as is often pronounced. Koinonia, fellowship. But here we have paresia, the appearing. It's actually a word that comes from the political world. When the emperor would appear and come into a city, his appearing, his approaching, was the paresia, the appearing of the king, of the emperor. And the New Testament uses this word for the second coming of Christ, is paresia. And finally, in syllabification, seventh rule, compound words are divided where they are joined. So for example, we have the preposition anti, and if you put it together with Christos, antichristos, antichristos is the Antichrist. Actually, anti, we'll learn this later, does not mean against as much as it means in the place of. The Antichrist is not one who, first of all, appears against Christ, but rather takes the place of Christ. And that's an important thing to remember. John says that in 1 John chapter 2 that many antichrists have gone out into the world. An interesting passage to read and think about. Now, to finish this section, I just want us to go over vocabulary and to pronounce it. This is vocabulary 1, and I believe it's on page 34 of your text. And you might find associating pictures with words helpful. We do that in what's called the growing or participator approach of learning the language, where especially for nouns, we'll have a picture. And in the beginning, the language learner points to the picture like a baby and just learns to hear the word and see the picture and to point to the picture without saying anything. So I've just captured some pictures and put them together with the vocabulary words in the list. By the way, V1 means the vocabulary one, or the list of vocabulary words at the end of chapter 1. So if we ask you to learn V1, we mean that you should memorize the vocabulary words at the end of chapter 1 in the list 1. If it's like V2.1, you'll find that there is a vocabulary list at the end of section 2.1. And there might be 2 lists or even 3 lists in any given chapter in our textbook. So chapter 12.1 has a vocabulary, that's V12.1. Chapter, and so forth. Section 12.2 of the second section of chapter 12 also has a vocabulary list, and that would be V12.2. Now, let's just look at some of these words and pronounce them. Ho, Abraham. Notice 2 vowels, same vowel, are separated, as we said in our syllabification rules. Ha, by the way, just means the. Now, we don't use the article the with proper names in English. In German, we sometimes do. And I lived in Germany for many years, so sometimes my German grammar may come through accidentally. Then we'll talk about the Abraham, meaning a certain man named Abraham. But in English, we don't do that. We just say Abraham. But in Greek, we need to remember the article because it's often used in the Greek text. Ha is the article, the masculine article. Abraham. Notice the accent on the last syllable. Abraham. You won't have any problem guessing who this is. And vocabulary list, and I'm just going down the list. This is Ha David. Notice that the uppercase delta is one letter that we don't see as often as the others. Ha David. The owl, alpha upsilon, is a diphthong, pronounced one sound, but the iota is pronounced separately. David. David. Those of you in South Asia won't have any problem with this one. And then I had to find a picture that fit the next word, and that was kind of hard to do, but I took one medieval, in other words, old well, maybe it was 19th century. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure who the painter was, the artist, but he depicted Ezekiel's vision of God. And so I used this picture from Ezekiel to represent this word, ho theos, God. Now, most of the words in the first vocabulary list in chapter 1 are proper names. Theos is in the Bible often a proper name. We address God, the only one and true God, and that is then a proper name. But you need to remember that theos can also be used in a generic sense. It can even be used in the plural, theoi, gods. So it is not necessarily a personal name, although it often is. Now, you probably recognize this city, even though the picture I have here is a little out of focus. I think you'll be able to put it together. There are two names for this city in the New Testament. One is He Hierosoluma. Notice that we have no diphthong with iota epsilon, so we have to pronounce each letter separately. We don't say he, we say He Hierosoluma. Hierosoluma. He Hierosolima. Now, it's a mouthful because we have two hard breathings. He Hierosolima is Jerusalem. But this way of spelling it and pronouncing it is actually locational. It almost always describes the location, the city Jerusalem, talking about an actual city where it is. The second way, hey, is a diphthong. By the way, I forgot to mention that because of the rough breathing, the iota epsilon is not a diphthong as it normally would be, and is in this case, except when you have iota epsilon together at the beginning, what often happens is in pronunciation, it becomes the sound. So not understandably, we pronounce this Hey Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, but Jerusalem. And then, of course, we get Jerusalem. It comes from the Greek. So, Hey Jerusalem. Hey is the feminine article, the. Cities are considered feminine in ancient Greek because cities were considered the mother of those who lived in them. Which doesn't mean that words are masculine or feminine or neuter. We have neuter in Greek. That necessarily gives gender. It doesn't, but in this case it does. You'll know who this is, and you'll recognize his name. Ho Jesus, or Jesus. Again, at the beginning, iota changes into a y sound. Ho Jesus. Ho Jesus. I'm sorry. Ho Jesus. Ho Jesus. Accent on the upsilon. Notice it's a circumflex accent, so spell it correctly. You don't have to put the accent marks in because we're not learning the rules. But if you do, you need to write them correctly. Ho Jesus. The Greek form of Yeshua from the Old Testament Savior, Yeshua, If you look in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, for example, the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation that the apostles had in their hands when they went on their missionary journeys. I don't know if they had a codex, there's a book like this, or if it was still in the form of a roll. I think it was actually still in scroll form, rolled up, because my understanding is that books were not bound like this. Codexes, we call them, until late in the first century AD. They would have taken the scrolls of the Bible around with them, although they would have memorized it probably pretty much. But the book of Joshua is the book of Jesus. If you look in the Greek translation for Joshua, you will see Jesus. That's the name of the book. Took this picture, and I'm sure you recognize who this represents. And again, we have an iota that begins a word, so it is ho Ioannes. Notice we have to divide the two nous between each other. Ioannes, Ioannes, ho Ioannes. John the Baptist in this case. Could it be another John, but you can see by the fact that he's standing in the water that he's the baptizer, John the Baptizer. I'm not sure why there's a bowl in his hand. Maybe the artist wanted to make a compromise between Baptists and Anglicans or something. So he put a cup so he could sprinkle and pour. I don't know. But this is a picture for John the Baptist that I found. This is how I picture this man, Petros. Notice the accent on the first syllable. Now, one of the reasons we don't learn accent rules is because accent rules with nouns are very complicated. In fact, you just almost have to memorize where they come. It's Christos, but it's Petros. Petros. I'm sure you recognize that this is Peter. Petros. And we have Jesus also in this picture, but it depicts the Holy Spirit coming upon him because he was empowered as the Christ of God. Actually, Christos, the Christ, is not so much a name as it is a title, an office. The Jews expected the Messiah, the anointed one, and in Greek, anoint is the verb chrio, and the noun form is Christos. Doesn't sound like Yeshua or Mashiach, Messiah, the anointed one, but that's because this is Greek and not Hebrew. Christos, the Christ. Now, the Christ does in the New Testament gradually become a proper name, the Lord Jesus Christ, but in many places it is referring to the Messiah that the Jews expected, a long-awaited anointed one by God. So you'll find it both a proper name and a title, an office that Jesus holds. So those are the vocabulary words in the first list. So we have a group of nouns that we can start beginning to build sentences with. We need nouns, but we need something else. And for that, we're going to look further in the second portion of this study, which is simple sentences. So see you in part B.